Say that anyone that has a comment or a joke or anything to remember Pat or whatever, you're welcome to come up here. And I'd like to call upon my crazy cousin John to say a few words. He's long-winded, PR guy. He's probably perfect for this situation.
That was beautiful, Johnny. Thank you. And wow, what a packed room. What a testament to who Pat McNally really was. I introduced myself very quickly earlier, and I said I was Pat's cousin. I'm actually lying. Well, no, technically that's true, but I call him my uncle, right? So I used to say, this is my Uncle Pat, and he'd say, this is my cousin John. You know, so I'll offset that age thing. But very seriously, Pat was my favorite uncle. And I've got a few, and I mean that very sincerely, and I thought about it over the last few days. What is it that makes a person your favorite uncle? And I think Pat had a way of transcending. He was family to me, to us, but he also became a friend, a very good friend. I think all of us in this room can relate to that in our own way, how Pat could touch you, could make you feel special, and could become your one and only friend when you really needed one. When I heard the news, Johnny called me, and we keep in touch, but we don't keep in regular touch. And when I saw the call come in, I replied right away. And I was in Toronto, and I flew back the next day, and I was flying over Saskatchewan here about 3-4 days ago, and it was a beautiful day. And I just took half an hour. I told my wife, and I just looked down on the Saskatchewan landscape, and I remember those memories that we've had for probably better part of 40 years now with Pat. So if I can just take a couple minutes of your time, I'd like to share some stories with you. And they go back, and I've culled them, if you will, so that I could give you a bit of a selection that was meaningful to our family. And when we talk of family with Patty, it actually started back with my grandmother, because my grandmother and Pat's father were brother and sister. And I remember the days, and we're going back to the 70s now, when Pat's mom, Alice, would come to our house in Edmonton, and my grandmother would be there, and I'd go to school in the morning, and they'd be sitting there in their house coats, laughing, sharing a cup of tea, and I'd come home for lunch, and they'd be sitting there in their house coats, laughing, sharing a cup of coffee. And I'd come back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd be sitting there, finely dressed, laughing, sharing a glass of scotch. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But certainly through Alice and getting to know Pat and Ruth and the family, it also goes down to my mom. My mom, unfortunately, just passed a few months ago as well, and I know that Pat and my mom were really close throughout the years, and there's a great story that he loves to tell of when Pat was about 16 years old, and my mom had about 10 years on him, and they were here in Saskatchewan, and I think down by Melfort or Yorkton or something, and they were trying to get a ride, and this is back in the 1950s, and they couldn't get a ride. Nobody would stop for them. So finally my mom says, Pat, go in the ditch, and he had these golf clubs. He's 16 years old, so he goes and climbs in the ditch, and my mom stands there, and she's like 25, right? Standing on the side of the road, puts her thumb out, the first car goes screeching to a halt. The guy's like, man, you want to ride? And she goes, Patty, come on. And he climbs into the ditch, and look on this guy's face, right? But he loved to tell that story. Beyond my grandmother and beyond my mom, I certainly have my own stories of Patty, and they really start back in 1976, and I remember it distinctly because it was the 76 Olympics, and I spent a summer here with you guys up at the old farmhouse up on the hill. And you know, most kids, when you're 10 years old, that's all the fun is maybe playing hide and seek or tag or something like that. But the fun for all of us was trying to find all Patty's Playboy magazines scattered throughout the house. So that was a good game, and it just continued along. And throughout the years, Pat would come to Edmonton and Ruth and visit, and it was always good times. And I remember right after high school, I came out to Saskatchewan and brought a girlfriend with me at the time, and Pat, of course, was being the charmer that he was. I think it lasted about 3 months with this girl, but I would see her in the years afterwards, and every time she'd see me, just like you were saying, she'd always say, how's your uncle? I think that was the only reason she crossed the street to talk to me. And about 10 years, or maybe more than that, I joined the military, and I spent 3 years out at the air base out here in Moose Jaw. And I would always go see Pat, and I'd call him up on a Friday night, and he'd say, come on out, we'll put a roast on. And I'd go out to the cabin, and one time I was out there, and we'd had a couple of sociables, and I was going to flip the roast over or do something with it, and Pat had these old gloves that you put on oven mitts that he had on the side of the cabin, so I'd take one, And I put my hand in it, and of course it had been lying there for God knows how long. And there was a bee's nest inside. And my hand got totally lit up, I pulled it out, about 20 bees, wasps flew out, and I was standing there going, oh. And Pat just looks at me and he goes, that hurts, doesn't it? I'm like, that hurts. He goes, hang on, I got something for that. And he runs in the cabin and he comes back out, and I'm thinking, this is great, he's got something to fix us, and he's got a double rum. So, in the final few years here, when my family, we were living in Calgary, Pat always made the effort. I think it had less to do with me than my beautiful wife. He always wanted to see her and visit with her, and later my son. And he'd always call me, he always made the time to say, I'm in Calgary, can we get together? And we always did. And he was always so proud of the fact that sometimes he would show up in what he called his new car. And I thought, oh, this is great. Finally, after all these years, Pat got a new car, and I'd go out and I'd say, what's this? He'd say, it's a new car to me. That would be his new car. But seriously, just in conclusion, I mean, Pat always had this connection with people. I think I speak for my wife as well, who said, when I told her I was coming out and it's a 9-hour drive, we're going to drive 9 hours, we're going to do this thing, drive back in 9 hours, and she said, I got to be there, because I want to be there for Patty. And my little boy remembers him as well. Pat had two things that I remember. He had an absolute and complete, utter love of life. Started with his family. He loved all of you. It went on to his friends, that's why you're all in this room. And it went to the experiences, whether it's Elvis, wherever he is, Dancing with Elvis impersonators, you name it. He loved life. And the second thing is Pat loved company. He couldn't do without company. I think it's what actually fulfilled him. Many of you in this room were his students, and he talked so fondly of all the years he spent at the school. If you ever went out and visited him in Sandy Beach, you'd know he always had CBC radio on, and because it was his company. And whether it was Rex Murphy or whoever else it was, that was his company. And even in the years that he retired and he went to Hatfield, I remember talking to him once and said, well, Pat, this is great, you know, you're a real estate agent and all that. He said, you know, I can't sell real estate worth a shit, but I just love meeting all the people. I don't know whether that's true or not, but the point is, Pat had to surround himself with people. How will I remember my favorite uncle? Funny, top of the list. One of the funniest guys I've ever met, and we can all learn from that. Loyal, perhaps to a fault sometimes, but loyal. I remember pigs, I remember his love for Barbra Streisand, all of the smaller things in life. Intelligent. Pat was an incredibly intelligent man. I learned a lot from him, and Trivial Pursuit was just one example of that. I remember him as being sometimes misbehaved, but most of all, I remember him as having the biggest heart of any of the people that I've ever known. So I think Pat would want us to know that he had a good life, and I believe he did. He had a life with no regrets. And I think he'd also want us to know that in the way that he wanted to be surrounded with good company when he was alive, he continues to be surrounded with good company now. And I think of him up there with his mom, I think of him up there with my mom, and I know he's in great company. I've been in the Navy 26 years, and we have a saying that we use when we say goodbye to somebody. It's very simple, and it's just fair winds and following seas. So fair winds, Pat.